Hello, ladies and gentlemen, fairies and leprechauns. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. Today we have Kat from Psycare Ireland. Welcome, Kat.
Thank you, Layo.
Thank you, Kat.
Mhm.
Kat, can you tell us what is Psycare?
Psycare is an organization that is currently registering as a CLG, and we provide harm reduction information around substance use, as well as psychological support services at music festivals and events in Ireland.
What's a CLG?
A CLG is a company limited by guarantee, so it's like a stepping stone on the way to becoming registered as a charity. But also it allows us to set up and take donations, and basically just get the ball rolling. We need equipment, we have expenses and things like that. So that structure will allow us to take the next step.
Right, okay, class. So you work at festivals and you basically, to summarize in layman terms, help people who are tripping.
Yeah, we help people who are tripping. We, in terms of like having a psychedelic trip,
Yeah.
we also help people who are having any kind of mental health difficulty in the music festival setting, regardless of whether that's been induced or if it's exacerbated by a substance. And that includes alcohol, cocaine, MDMA, ketamine. We've seen a lot of all of those things at music festivals this year. It was our first year, actually, 2022. But we've also seen many people who just came in with general overwhelm in the festival setting, people who had panic attacks, who had social anxiety, people who'd experienced bereavement recently. So it's a very broad service, and it's all really just about being there for other people and holding space for people within the environment of a festival.
Mm, yeah, because in Ireland, like partying can really be seen as a form of therapy.
Hmm.
Like, I know from my own personal experiences, in order to forget about the reality of work and anxiety and depression and addiction, I would go towards partying as like the natural chemicals or the exogenous chemicals that are released during that, like it gives you a high, it makes you feel better at the time, and then sometimes the drug can make you feel worse later on.
Absolutely.
So in the festival environment, have you ever came across someone who has experienced a psychosis?
Hmm. I have. Um, so this summer, I actually was traveling a lot around Europe, and I was working for other similar organizations that are based outside of Ireland. I worked with Cosmic Hair at Boom Festival, and I worked with Psychare UK at Modem Festival. And at one of those festivals, there was a person who had ingested a lot of psychedelic substances as well as marijuana or weed that we believe was very high in THC, which is the more psychoactive component of weed. And they presented to the service on, I think it was a Friday, where, it was the tail end of the festival, but there was still a few days to go. And they were very much in a psychedelic state. They were talking about seeing things, feeling things, but they were also experiencing some paranoia. They were with a friend and they were looking for more drugs. They wanted to actually smoke more weed, and we were trying to support the friend as well as supporting the person and trying to keep them safe.
Do they want to smoke more weed to calm down?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So they didn't really have insight into um, their own state at that moment, that that actually they kind of needed, it would be more in their interest to kind of come down instead of getting more into an altered state. So and also during that time when the person was paranoid, unfortunately they did kind of, yeah, they were not totally peaceful in the service. And I think the person accidentally um physically touched off one of the volunteers, but like in a slightly aggressive way. But it was dealt with in a very positive way. Um, I think that it was related to their feeling of paranoia, and thankfully nobody was injured. But at the same time, it was serious because it meant that we couldn't allow that person to leave the service because they could be at risk of being attacked or potentially hurting other people who they interacted with. So eventually we had to call the medical services at the festival, and they were given a sedative. I think it was a benzodiazepine that they used, which is
Okay.
frequently used in people with drug-induced psychosis, I
Yeah.
suppose. And after that, they slept in the service, and they were there the following day. They were still tripping. The following day, they were still tripping. The day after that was the last day of the festival. They were still tripping. And the festival was closing, but the space, the service usually stays open for a day or two after the general population of the festival would leave, because there can be cases like this where people are struggling to leave the festival environment. It's people can get almost like a culture shock when they leave these kind of psychedelic festivals. So there's need for holding space longer than the actual program sometimes. But the day came when we actually had to close down the entire service, and the whole festival site was being cleared. And we had to get in contact with the person's family. They lived on the other side of Europe. So we were contacting them. Unfortunately, their family were unable to pick them up. We had to organise for transport of that person to their home country with their friend. And we ended up having to call medical services in that country to come and assess the person. And they were brought to a psychiatric hospital, and they received some medication to help them through the journey. So it was a very interesting experience, but honestly, it was one of the most profound experiences that I had for the whole year, I would say, of everything that I've done this year. I remember when the paramedics arrived, and we had to tell them, of course, that the full story, that this person had been involved in a kind of aggressive interaction with one of our volunteers. And they were like, what do you mean? Like, you're not calling the police? Like, you need the police here, you need security here to deal with this violent person. And we, of course, knew that this person wasn't like that at all. They were just in a very elated and elevated state, in a very expansive state of consciousness. And at that moment, they were stressed, they were confined, they felt they were being trapped, they were paranoid, and that wasn't a true reflection of them. So I actually personally went into, we were sitting with the person, some of my co-volunteers were sitting with this person in an area with lots of nature, because in that expansive mind state, the person wanted to just be like up around trees and was talking about beautiful colors that they were seeing, and coming out with the most amazing phrases about people and love and humanity. And it was very sad. It kind of broke my heart a little bit that we had to end, or at least try end, this state that they were in, because they had a job, they had a life to return to, and they couldn't function in our society in that state because they would be vulnerable. But when I went to the place where they were sitting, and I told them, we have some people here who are going to help take you home. And the person kind of had this fleeting insight at times to be like, I know that what I'm experiencing is not the way I would normally experience things.
Not grounded in reality.
Yes. Yeah. And it would come and go, that insight, but they were happy that we were going to help them go home. And we didn't lie to the person. That was something that I learned actually from the experience of working with the other volunteers. Many of them came from so many different backgrounds. And one thing one of my colleagues said to me was, never lie to somebody, especially when they're in a psychedelic state or in a state of spiritual emergence, psychosis, because they know you're not being genuine, and that can fracture trust.
Yeah.
And they're much less likely to believe that you're truly acting in their best interest.
Yeah.
If you lie. So we didn't lie. And it was a real lesson for me working in services not to be like, oh yeah, we're just going over here for whatever reason, thinking that you know better, because it creates that power differential. But it's really about meeting people where they're at and being true and open and honest, and um, not creating a power differential. Like if someone is lying on the ground and you're trying to help them, you should lie on the ground.
Getting their level.
Yeah, just simple things like that that you're not taught.
About lying,
Yeah.
I don't know if this is a particular thing with psychosis
Mm.
or psychedelics
Mm-hmm.
or people who are highly sensitive,
Mm-hmm.
but particularly whenever I was in a psychosis, I could tell if anyone was lying. And I I'm pretty in touch with it now as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
And I feel like it grows with intuition.
Yeah.
But maybe this is just a hypothesis. Whenever you're in a psychosis, you're more in touch with your intuition, and so you're able to tell whether people are lying or not. Whether that's through reading body language or the tone of voice, or yeah, there's a couple of reasons it could be, but
Yeah.
it's uh it's definitely important to not lie whenever you're in that situation.
It really is. And the most beautiful part of that particular story for me was I told the person, we have some people here, they're going to take you to a hospital and they're going to help you get home to your family. And I had said to the paramedics, okay, I'll go in and see how things are, and then I'll come back out and we can chat and we can talk about the next step. And before, like I said 2 words to the paramedics, just tell them like, oh yeah, things are calm there, everything's fine. The person walked out from that area completely unprompted with open arms towards the paramedics and took their hand and said, oh, you're Kat's friend and you're here to take me home. And I was just so like amazed at like just the pure love and just that pure, I suppose, heart-centered consciousness that that person was channeling at that moment, that I was just blown away. But at the same time, I know that if we had gone into that situation being like, you're psychotic, you need meds, you're crazy, you're mad, you're going in the back of this ambulance, like it's all about how you approach these things. We didn't lie, but we had built up enough trust over those preceding days within the model of what is psych-caring for people, that it allowed this transition to their home to happen. And the person, thankfully, I really hope, was not traumatized by the experience, but so many people are traumatized by the mental health care that they receive in this country, in other countries, and it's to do with stigma, labeling, and not being met with humanity and compassion. And Psycare is about changing that. Music festivals are a microcosm of the wider society, and people go there for all kinds of reasons. Um, Everyone expects to have an amazing time, but it doesn't always happen. But dynamics that you see in wider society play out in music festivals too. And that's why starting with music festivals, it's really important, because they're also often synonymous with a lot of substance use, um, and can be very places where people have very intense emotional experiences.
Definitely. Why did you start Psycare Ireland?
Um, First things first, it wasn't me, actually. It was me
Sorry.
and it was I was a part of it, but it's a community project actually started by my brother.
Mm,
My brother Michael, he goes by Mick. Um, he went and volunteered with Psycare UK in
okay.
2021 and was super inspired and decided that it was really needed. And once he was kind of on that journey, he was like, you're coming with me. I had wanted to volunteer with Psycare UK myself, but I was doing exams for college at the time. But I was very much interested in the project, and it was actually hatched over COVID through lots of conversations. But also the why is really from experience of being at gigs, being at music festivals. Both me and my brother worked in homeless and addiction services, not together, but we worked for the same organization in different centres. And saw a lot of people who were in active addiction, people with mental health difficulties. But also at the same time, you would see just from being like a young person, going to music festivals and gigs, as I said, like just the need for psychological support in those settings. Um, yeah, so it really just came from the gap, the lack of services that are available here, and wanting to change that. Um, Also having times ourselves, I don't think there's many young people in Ireland who haven't needed psychological support in a partying setting at some point in their life, whether it be I got too drunk or I got too high or I fell out with my friends, whatever it might be. Um, so just to bridge that gap.
Well, yeah, honestly, fair play. Like, it is such a needed resource. I've had so many times at festivals where I have went off to a corner on my own, sat there with my head in my hands,
Mm-hmm.
just feeling so distraught
Mm-hmm.
and lost,
Yeah.
and like being so excited with the anticipation of the event, and then the event happens, and I'm like, is this it? And I feel so lost,
Mm.
so depressed, and confused. And I've spoken about this a couple of times, but my first breakdown was at a techno festival in Belfast.
Mm-hmm.
It was called AVA.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, the first AVA I went to, what I just pictured to you there, having my head in my hands and sitting in the corner of the festival, that was me. And someone who I did not know came up to me and was like, "Are you all right, bro?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "I don't know, man. I don't feel great." And in his empathetic state, he offered me an ecstasy pill.
Okay.
And like to him, that was the best thing that he could offer to help me at that time to give me a more of an elevated state.
Okay.
And like, as you probably know yourself, that's not the best thing for someone who's in that state at the time.
Definitely not.
Yeah. Um, Thankfully, I was wise enough to say, I'm all right, mate, I'll pass on this one.
Mm.
But the following year, I went to AVA again,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a 2 day festival. After the first festival, we went to an after party. My mates were organising. It went on till 7 a.m. Then I was walking around Belfast city centre, and I have got a video made in this, so like I'll post it in the future. So I'll not go too deep into it, but basically I ended up climbing Belfast's second biggest hill called Cacao.
Wow.
I attempted it, and like it was in a state of despair, and I didn't climb up Cave Hill. I climbed up the neighboring hill. This added to my critical negative self-belief of myself, saying, "Oh, I can't even fucking climb up the right hills."
Oh.
And I had a breakdown at the top of the hill. And the next day I went to the festival with
Mm.
no sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And people came up to me and they'd heard that I climbed Cave Hill, and they were like, "Yo, Leo, did you climb Cave Hill this morning? You're a mad bastard." And I was just like holding in this despair, being like, "Yeah, I did." And like I had no one to talk to about that. At that point, I didn't know what psychology was at that point. And yeah, it led to me partying more, taking ecstasy, feeling like there was this switch where I did lose my mind. And this is like 3 to 4 years before psychosis as well.
Hmm.
And it was a dark, challenging path. So, what you're doing is really going to help a lot of people.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm really touched by that story, particularly the part where someone asked you, "Have you climbed Cave Hill?" And you weren't able to say, "No, I didn't climb Cave Hill. I climbed a hill that was beside it." So,
Yeah, it's so true. I couldn't even live up to that embarrassment, you know?
but this is the thing, is that, like, put it this way, society asks us, to show up in all these ways and perform or work or whatever it is. And there are specific metrics about, like, like you're a mad bastard or you're a legend if you've climbed Cave Hill, but nobody cares about the cave that you've climbed in, or not the cave, the hill that you've climbed on the inside. Like, there's so many people who get branded lazy or whatever other negative stereotypes people face with mental health, or, oh, you can't even get yourself up out of bed in the morning, about their mental health. But doing those things, it's like climbing their own version of a massive hill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're so right. Um, Not to go back to myself, but like I would always have slept in and like lay in bed until like 1 or 2 p.m.
Mm.
My mom would always be like, "Oh, you're so lazy, get up."
Mm.
And like I was depressed.
Yeah,
And that is the reality for a lot of people.
it is.
Yeah. Okay, Kat, so that's why you started Psycare.
Hmm.
Uh, Presumably you had your own struggle with mental health beforehand. Is that the case?
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
Would you mind briefly going into a little bit of detail about your experience with mental health?
Sure. Yeah. Um, yeah. A number of years ago, when I was leaving school, I had a depressive episode. Um, and I felt very isolated, even though I was surrounded by people. Um, I carried a lot of shame. Um, I felt unable to talk to people, even my family, about it at the time. Um, and it kind of came to a crisis point where somebody else, actually, who didn't know me that well at all, but was, I came to them for one reason, but then they kind of started asking me a number of questions. They noticed something was off. Um, and they said to me, like, actually, I think that this problem that you're having is much bigger than maybe you realize, and that I think you need help. And even though it was very scary, it helped me to um, face up to the reality that I was depressed, and that I'd been depressed for probably about a year at that point. Yeah, about that. Um, so I ended up dropping out of college. Um, I saw a psychiatrist. I went to therapy, my first therapist, and I didn't gel well. That's okay, that happens. You just have to find someone who does gel with you. Um, I was put on medication. That helped a little bit. It helped with the initial, like, really bogged down uh, feeling that I was experiencing. Like, as you mentioned, like not getting out of bed, like finding it really hard to get up and going in the morning. Having difficulty getting to sleep, waking up very early in the morning, persistently low mood, negative self-talk, kind of quite a negative state of mind a lot of the time. And ultimately it led me to question a lot about, like, what is the point in anything. Um, Slowly things got better, though. I think one of the things was medication, talking. I reached out to my family eventually, and after I dropped out, they were, I had kind of had to come clean
Yeah.
because it was like, what's the story? Like, you're not going back. And I was like, I can't. I wasn't able. And another big thing for me actually in all that was that my concentration was very badly affected at that time. I remember I had this experience, Freshers Week, when yeah, that year when I was really in the depths of it, like this was months before I actually got help, and someone came up to me and greeted me like they knew me, and I was just so confused as to like who this person was, and I realized like eventually I had to ask him, I was like, I'm sorry, have we met? And it turned out we had actually had a full conversation for like a significant amount of time, like 30, 40 minutes or something like that, the day before, and I just had no recollection, which was scary.
Was this while you're on medication?
No, this was before.
Before?
Before.
Wow.
Yeah,
Just so like not present and in your head.
exactly. That's what I think it was. It was to do with the tension. So I ended up taking a year off college actually, and I worked a few different odd jobs. Um, my initial part of my recovery was very like up and down.
It's never linear.
It's never linear, and I tell people that I work with that all the time, that recovery is not linear. Um, um, but it still feels like I'm going back. Like at the time, it felt like I was going backwards. Like I remember one time I had an anxiety attack in work, and that was very stressful, very, very stressful. But, from a lot of different things that were going on, like there was some bullying in my workplace. But actually, it really taught me that it really matters how you treat your colleagues. Like even the people who like, if you work in an office, the people who clean your office, be nice to those people.
Yeah.
If you work in a hospital, be nice to the people who clean the hospital, the people who serve you lunch. They're people. I was working in a kitchen in a hospital. I was literally like, in terms of the hierarchy of the system, I was the the lowest end of it. I was also one of the youngest staff members, and I was bullied by someone who was higher up in that hierarchy. And yeah, it just all again came to a head, and then I sought help. And but that was the thing, is that what propelled me forward was seeking help. I ended up doing CBT then, which really helped me a lot. Cognitive behavioral therapy, looking at my own negative thinking, along with the medication to help actually elevate me out of that really depressed place. So I kind of had to kind of dig myself out of this little hole to get to a place where I could do therapeutic work, which I did. But it was actually a long process, the recovery. The initial, like I would say I was not depressed, but for quite a long time afterwards, I still felt different. Eventually, I began to feel quite numb from the medication, and I decided to come off it.
What was that like for you?
Um, a very positive experience, actually. It's very well supported. I tapered my medication down. I had times when I accidentally forgot to take my medication. I went into withdrawals. That was not good. So this time when I decided to come off it, like with intention, it really was good. Like I was going on holidays and I chatted with my GP about it beforehand. And I said, like, look, I'm planning on coming off this. I've been on it for about 3 years at that point. And I realized I didn't really need it anymore. But it's funny, I think that my mental health really improved. It was like, it's not like I had depression and then I didn't have depression. It was like I had vulnerability to depression. Then I had a moderate depressive episode, which passed, but the vulnerability for depression was still there. And
Mm-hmm.
I had to slowly over years build up a self-care uh, package, toolkit to look after myself. And I've worked on that for many years now. And some of the other key parts of it for me was I was diagnosed with an underactive thyroid in the middle of all that, which explained why I was so tired all the time. There are many different things going on in my life as well, like personal things. And But that was a big thing. And then taking up exercise was huge. I remember I got on a bike for the first time in years and I wasn't really doing a lot of exercise. I was kind of, my head was kind of too far into the books, to be honest. I was just too like hard driven looking at studying and socializing to do exercise. And it really actually elevated my mood. And I realized that that was a key thing. And then another thing was actually coming off the contraceptive pill. Um, yeah.
which we had a great conversation about earlier.
Yes, yeah, we did. Um, and yeah, I think that there's a whole host of things that we are only coming to understand about how the contraceptive pill has affected women and how it's affected their mental health. Um, Contraception is very important, but I believe that people need to be informed before they make these decisions about what contraceptive method they choose. Um, yeah.
So that is your toolbox. Is there
Mm-hmm.
anything else in your toolbox?
There is meditating fairly regularly. Meditating helps me to kind of get out of my mind and more, well, it's not about calming down the mind for me, it's about like just noticing where my mind is. So like mindfulness is about like noticing the present moment. And for me, it's like sitting on the side of the road watching cars go by instead of being in traffic, like chasing after a car or trying to dodge cars or being frustrated because there's so many cars on the road. It's about sitting on the side and being like, oh yeah, green car, blue car. Just being like, okay. And a lot of the time, it's also about not identifying with whatever is happening in my mind. So if there's like really intense frustration or emotion or just busyness or worry, and this is one of the beautiful things about like Irish language, for example, just to bring this in too, is that the way we conceptualize in the English language our emotions is I am angry, I am happy, I am sad. Whereas, in Irish it would be, oh, tá bronnúram. Sadness is, I suppose, on me,
Yeah.
but you can just take it off. And it's like you or I am separate from these emotions. They're just experiences that we're having and they come and they go. So meditating is huge for me. And ceremonial cacao is something that I use quite frequently as well, alongside exercise like yoga, dancing, love dancing, to get into the body, to really ground and get into the body. So that's, yeah. And socializing, seeing friends, talking. I'm a bit of a talker. Um, but yeah, connecting, laughing, nature. Yeah, music. Music is a huge thing for me. I love singing, playing piano, playing guitar. It doesn't matter how good you are, just to like, and even just listening to music, and it goes beyond words. Expresses things like our mind is obviously in words, whereas music and nature, it's beyond words.
Completely. Yeah. All the things you just mentioned there have all been clinically tested and suggest that it increases your brain health.
Mm.
And there's a field of psychiatry with, have you heard of Dr. Daniel Eamon?
No, I haven't actually.
No. So he has, I don't know if he created it, but he uses a SPECT scan,
Okay.
which is something to do with nuclear.
Oh yeah.
And they put it into your skin
Mm-hmm.
and then they scan your brain to see how healthy it is.
Okay.
And from the brain scan, they are able to see the similarities between different types of illnesses. For example, someone who's got a schizophrenic brain can, you can tell by the health of the brain. Similarly, someone who's gone through addiction issues,
Mm-hmm.
you can see the where their brain has depleted. And his hypothesis is that you can get rid of mental illnesses by giving yourself the healthiest brain possible.
Okay.
And it is through his theory and beliefs that encouraged me to continue experimenting with things that were supposedly healthy for your brain,
Mm,
such as music, socializing, nature, exercise, meditation, prayer. All these things are giving yourself a healthier brain.
mm,
And that is what my How to Battle Psychosis playlist is based on.
okay.
All these things that are healthy for your brain, I believe, will cure you from psychosis, similarly how it helped me cure from psychosis. Of course, there is a trauma side towards psychosis.
Of course.
The majority of people that have experienced psychosis have experienced some sort of emotional turmoil or trauma in their past, and that is in need to be dealt with. Similarly with the shadow, as we were talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
However, I believe that these practices of giving yourself a healthy brain,
Mm-hmm.
if you implement all of these into your life consistently, potentially you can avoid the use of medication. Yeah, I'll send you some Dr. Daniel Amen later on.
Please do. I'm really interested in that.
He works with like Justin Bieber and all these
Okay.
celebrities.
And even just on medication, like I work in psychiatry, I'm trained in medicine, studied psychology before that. And I think that medication can be a useful adjunct, but it can't do all the work. Like it's hypothesized, for example, that like things like serotonin and dopamine are involved in depression. Like I'm talking really broad strokes here. In psychosis, there's a hypothesis that dopamine is largely involved as well. Um, Even just let's say talking about those two conditions, um, that still isn't proven. And medication acts on those receptors, like serotonin, dopamine receptors, but also have a host of other effects because of the intimate relationships between our neurochemistry and other chemical and neurobiological processes in our brain and our body. So, for example, even antipsychotics, the most recent generation of antipsychotics have huge side effects on our metabolism. So, as I'm sure you're probably well aware,
Yep.
it can increase your body weight, can make you resistant to insulin, um, lots of other things.
They're all black labeled as well. Like if you take them, it is almost certain that it is going to decrease your life longevity.
Yes, that is true. That's absolutely true. And yeah, I suppose like for me, medication is not the only answer. It can be helpful, especially when someone's in an acute state. And some people do need a medication, like even say a mood stabilizing medication or whatever it might be to help. But I'm really curious to see how that's going to change as we learn more and more about the brain and how we understand how things that maybe affect our brain chemistry but also induce an experiential element like psychedelics, how the meaning brought on by those experiences. Yes, it affects our brain chemistry. For example, many psychedelics like psilocybin, they say act on the 5-HT2A receptor. Um, so one of the a specific serotonin receptor. But we need to also analyze like what is coming up for that person and what does it mean when they're having a psychedelic experience and how does that change symptoms of depression, like being able to get out of bed in the morning. You can relate, like the neurochemistry is one part of the picture, but I feel like there's so many ways to hijack that system. Like we don't know if for mental illness it starts, is it like chicken or egg basically? Is it the neurochemistry goes wrong and then you have symptoms and it means that you don't feel meaning in your life, or can having more meaning in your life, having more like a healthier brain, or um yeah, is it that the serotonin naturally increases as a result of these things? It's a two-way relationship. It's a multifactorial thing. So meds is like dumping a load of extra chemicals in on top, but it won't fix your trauma. It can come with numerous side effects as we've talked about. And ultimately, if a person is not ready to look at their own habits as well, and that their chances of a full long lasting recovery are less than someone who maybe, you know, maybe there's part of the problem is in their neurochemistry. So maybe meds can be part of the solution for that person. The best way is to also engage in therapy and also looking at our own lifestyle as well. It's a really big, expansive picture, and it's why I'm personally so interested in like lifestyle, leading a healthy lifestyle, exercise, all of those things that I mentioned that are in my own toolkit. And there's not enough out there, that it's not spoken about enough in psychiatry, the importance of all of these things.
Completely. Similarly, alongside therapy too, therapy is not the cure-all solution either.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what I do believe the cure-all solution is taking responsibility, because once you're taking responsibility, then therapy will work, then medication might work, then you'll be able to reel in the importance of changing your habits. It's you taking the responsibility for your own actions that can then lead to the possibility of recovery.
Mm. Yeah.
And uh, similarly, particularly with psychosis and sometimes depression as well, people will blame their genetics for
Yeah.
the way that they feel.
Okay.
They will say, "Oh, my mother had schizophrenia, therefore I'm fucked. My grandfather was depressed, therefore that's why I'm depressed."
Mm-hmm.
And there is not a lot of evidence to suggest that genetics plays that big a role within psychosis. And there are continual experiments to see what part genetics does play.
Yeah.
And they're still doing these experiments because they haven't found the concrete answer yet.
Yes.
And yet, doctors tell people that they are genetically predisposed to this.
Mm.
And yes, they probably are a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
but that doesn't mean it's impossible to recover.
Yes, and I think that's the important point, is that like I see it in work, that I know that family history is a really important part, but it isn't only genetics. Like genetics just gives you, as you said, the predisposition. But also the other thing that genetics, especially if you grew up with those family members, it's about adaptive or maladaptive coping strategies. It's about your habits, about your way of looking at the world, your thinking styles. It's about the quality of those relationships. Like if your parent had a mental illness or a mental health difficulty, one of the reasons why you might be more likely to have one yourself is because that parent might not have been able to be there for you or have the relationship that a relationship with you that would have been the most nurturing or the most present, because they were dealing with their own things.
Additionally, the habits that they are doing, as a child, you suck in your environment and you copy the people that are around you.
Yes.
And so you could be copying their unhealthy habits,
Yeah.
which are accumulating and allowing this psychosis or depression to come in.
That is true. And I think, though, in those studies that you mentioned about, like where they try to study the genetic impact, like they try to control for these kind of factors, like looking at, like, they might measure like quality of parental relationship and things like that, and they'll try to control for that through measurement and statistical analysis. um so I do personally believe that there is a strong genetic component in some of these mental health difficulties, but it's definitely not the whole picture. And for someone to feel that their mental health is doomed because they have a relative with a mental health difficulty is it's not the right message to be giving people. Um, and also, by the same token, you can know nobody with a mental health difficulty and still experience one yourself. In my case, I didn't really know anybody. Like, as far as I knew at that time, I was like, I've never heard of anybody in my family having this. And another thing is about like stigma as well. Everybody has mental health. Um, and it's just not, it's getting better now. Obviously, people talking more about it, but like when I had that experience, that was only about 10 years ago, and I felt so alone. And the mental health campaigns that we have now, I didn't, they were not on my radar. And I'm just really glad that things have changed. Um, yeah.
Yeah, so am I.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier about volunteering in homeless shelters.
Yeah.
Yeah. From my understanding of studying the likes of Gabor Mate, who
Mm-hmm.
have dealt with a lot of people who are homeless and suffer from addiction,
Mm-hmm.
they also suffer from a multitude of different types of mental illnesses
Yeah.
too. During your time in these homeless shelters, did you experience many people who were going through a psychosis?
I did. Yeah. Um, and I was actually working, so I was doing paid work as like a relief worker. So I would like cover for people who were sick and on holidays, and turns out they needed a lot of shifts covered because the burnout rate was quite high as well. Because yeah, you see a lot working in different services. Psychosis came up quite frequently. In one of the places that I worked, there was quite a high number of residents, we called them, because they lived in the centre, who had been living in institutions for most of their lives. They were institutionalized. Many of them were on antipsychotic medication and other psychoactive meds for a very, very long time. Um, and if they came off those meds, they would sometimes um, have resurgence in their or like reemergence of their symptoms. So like hearing things, seeing things that other people couldn't hear and see, or different beliefs. Um, and sometimes I wondered about some of the people that I saw, about if we had a different way of looking at psychosis, like what would their outcomes be like? For example, I know in other cultures, being able to hear and see things that other people can't is not seen as like an illness. It's seen as a gift. And sometimes I wonder now, I'm not sure where this feeling or question that I have, where it's going to go in the future. But sometimes I wonder if it wasn't so stigmatized and if we actually encouraged people to talk about their experiences of voices and their experience of visions. Does the stigma kind of lead to it becoming more negative and more debilitating? Um, for example, I know that in psychedelic states, for example, if you are having a difficult experience, that if you try to lean against it, or as in try push against it and reject it, it can sometimes actually amplify it. Because our brains, if you're putting mental energy into fighting something, you're still feeding that with energy, regardless of whether you're trying to block it or enhance it. By rejecting it, you're still sending like a signal that like this is big. You're still reacting to it in a big way, so it can enhance it. And I've read some research, like from the Hearing Voices Network in Ireland, that apparently 1 in 10 people experience voices.
That high.
Apparently,
Wow.
now that was a few years ago that I read that.
Yeah. Study I seen was 3 in 100.
3 in 100. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's significantly less, but that's still a significant number.
Yeah.
And um, I think that psychosis, and watching some of your videos, I know that I think that it's amazing that you're actually talking about psychosis, because it's not talked about enough. We have all these wonderful campaigns for people who have feelings of depression and anxiety, and it's almost, the stigma has reduced a lot. But the stigma surrounding psychosis is still really significant. And I think that this is incredibly valuable, and that you're actually changing, you're part of the waves of change. So really fair play to you on talking so openly about your own experiences.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Slaps Mike, as I say, thank you.
Mic slap.
Note to self, don't put on your heart. No, you're right though. Like all these mental health charities talk about anxiety, talk about depression,
Yeah.
and they do not mention psychosis.
Hmm.
Quite often, whenever psychosis comes into the picture, it's quite often when psychosis comes into the picture, it's related with very like negative implications.
Yeah.
Like, oh, they're psychotic, they're a psychopath.
Yes.
Quite frequently, in people's daily terminology, they will refer to the word psychotic as anything that is crazy or completely irrational. And I have to like calm myself down and be like, that's not actually psychotic, is it?
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, what you were saying about 10 years ago about not knowing anyone else who'd experienced mental health issues, like I felt so alone during my psychosis.
Mm.
So that's why I'm putting this message out there. So thank you so much.
Yeah, not at all. And I think language is a really important yeah, it informs like when people throw around terms without thinking, without being conscious, and you hear them and you're like, that's about me, or like it hurts me. Like that has such a big impact on people. And even I find myself, I'm trying to get better at not saying like that's crazy or that's mad. And it just it comes, it's in our it's a colloquialism. It's like in our
Culture.
culture. It's
Yeah.
just in our,
To say
yeah.
that's mad, you're a mad bastard. Like it's
Yes,
so common.
yes. Or like lunatic, for example, to do it like the moon and people going into uh maybe elevated states when the moon comes out, or depressed states. It's very hard. It takes time and to change the language, I mean. And I think that people call like, what is it? We're not Gen Z.
Oh, we are Gen Z.
No, I'm not Gen Z. Are we? I'm a millennial anyway.
Are you?
Yeah, apparently. That's a whole separate conversation.
Yeah, see, I thought I was not a millennial, but I was Gen Z.
Okay.
I thought a millennial was after the 2000s. Maybe some
No, no,
youngsters can
no.
let us know
Yeah,
here.
no, no. I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure we would be classified as millennials.
Really?
Yeah, I think
Because
so.
we're alive during the 21st
I
century.
believe so. Yeah. I
Right.
don't know what the definition is, but anyway, people say that, like young people today are like all special snowflakes, and that that people have to walk on eggshells around us. But why wouldn't you want to change your way of being, your way of interacting with the world in a way that's more inclusive and more less stigmatizing? And in fact, what it's about is actually making other people less on eggshells, through monitoring or just even making slight alterations in the way that we speak.
Yeah, we're supposed to change.
Yeah.
Were there, did you experience any more profound experiences while working within the homeless community?
Many. I did. So many. I worked there a long time.
Yeah.
Um, I worked in like one big center where there were people like in active addiction, like I said, people who were trying to recover, people who had been in institutions a long time. I met a good few people as well who just were kind of down on their luck, as they say, and had no issues with addiction, no real apparent mental health difficulties, and just circumstances. Like that's a huge problem that we're currently facing in Ireland as well, the housing crisis.
Yeah.
But I've also worked in services where they specialize in I worked in one service where it was for women who wanted to change their lives after having been through the prison system. Um, and I worked in another place where for people who are coming out of rehab and helping them like reintegrate into the community. Um, I worked in a couple of other places as well, but they're the places I spent the most time. And I think the thing that's really stuck with me is just the impact of stigma on people, and also the impact of um, doctors. They say a teacher casts a long shadow. Teachers, as in like good teachers, can lift somebody up, like that one good person who believes in a young person, or they can cast a bad shadow. And I also believe that doctors carry that same shadow as part of the pillars of society, our education system, our healthcare system. Um, Hearing from before I studied medicine, like hearing positive and negative experiences of people within our hospital and mental health care system of like, like simple things like, and I saw it when I went on to study medicine, the difference between the doctor who will stand at the edge of the bed, kind of towering over somebody, not looking them in the eye, talking about them at the end of the bed as if they're a piece of meat, not using the person's name, not looking, those kinds of things versus the person who will get on the same level. And it all comes back down to like what I was saying about supporting someone in acute crisis, even at a music festival. If they're on the floor, get on the floor. Um, and I guess it was about the reality that humans are all equal and that just because you're wearing a white coat with a stethoscope around your neck, or just because you've got whatever letters before or after your name, or where you come from, what you look like, we're all the same. And yeah, just really saw that firsthand through working in people who are at the fringes of society. Like the stigma of being homeless is huge, or it was when I was working in the services, but it just really taught me, as did many of my experiences, like that experience as I mentioned of like being in that hierarchical hospital system back when I had my own struggles with mental health. It's all kind of, they've been little stops along the way on the path that I find myself on.
Wow. Whenever you mentioned about the doctor standing at the end of the hospital bed and not saying the patient's name, it really it brought a flashback memory for me.
Okay.
Whenever I was in hospital in Tasmania,
Mm.
I crashed a mountain bike and I broke a bone in my neck.
Oh,
I had 3 discs that I placed in my back and I got like 30 stitches inside and outside my mouth.
oh my God. Wow.
That's where. In here.
Okay. Wow.
And I remember while I was in the bed, there was no Wi-Fi. I had no phone. I
Mm.
had no book. It was the, some of the hardest days of my life. And it was also a high amount of students coming in and out of this hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember there was like a class of maybe 8 students sitting by my bed, and the doctor had his little board talking about me, not looking at me, and all the students be like looking at me, and I was just sitting there like feeling like a piece of meat, like you said, like a monkey in a zoo behind the window. And yeah, it all stems from empathy, doesn't it?
It really does. And I've been in a pack of medical students standing around someone's bed and feeling deeply uncomfortable. Didn't happen all the time, but even this year, I've seen it working in, I've worked a lot of different medical based jobs. This year, I finished my internship. I worked as a locum. Now I'm working in psychiatry. And I've seen someone like towering over someone, like, they'll say hello and then they'll like put a clipboard like blocking the patient's face, and they're like talking to their colleagues, and the person's in the bed terrified and this person's just like towering over them. It's really strange to me how people lose their sense of humanity when they step into particular roles. Um,
Milgram did a psychological experiment on this, right?
yeah,
To
the Milgram's experiment. Which one is that? Remind me.
because he has a Jewish background,
Okay.
and so it was quite recent after the Second World War.
Yeah.
He wanted to see why the people working in the Holocaust did what they did.
Okay.
And in the experiment, he basically like commanded people to electrocute someone on a chair,
Oh yeah.
and by just telling them to go past the zone of where it's not safe, like this person will die,
Mm.
so many people went past that state and just kept on hitting the button because they were told to hit the button, even though they knew that this was going to kill them.
Mm.
And the person, they were only able to hear their audio You could
Okay.
hear them screaming, and it wasn't actor,
Okay.
so the person didn't actually
Mm.
die. But if it was a real life experiment, they would have killed the person
Wow.
because they're going past that point of no return. And yeah, it is due to the role that they play and the instructions that they're given.
Hmm. Yeah. And that's it. Like we have a duty to not pass on things that have been done to us, you know. Like I see that so frequently. People who train upcoming doctors, and I see it in other professions too. It's like, oh, well, you've no idea how hard I had it when I was in training. And then they might lessen it a little bit, but they'll still, you know, very much enforce a hierarchical system. Um, Now, don't get me wrong, hierarchy is important in terms of experience, levels of experience. You need to know who to call. Who's the most experienced person in the room that deserves respect. And I think that in some ways hierarchy is important, but that sense of common humanity is just so essential to me.
So yeah, Kat, what you were saying about like the power and the hierarchy, like it is important, but sometimes power can, you know, override the situation. Why going from working in the kitchens in the hospital, why did you go into study psychology and then medicine and now you're looking to go into psychiatry, right?
I think so.
You think so?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, yeah. So I think I always wanted to like for me, the question of why anything? Why do people think the way they think, behave the way they behave, act, you know, like all of those things, what drives it? And then psychology answered so much of that for me. Um, and I loved that. But then had more questions. Why? Um, I wanted to know what was going on at like a cellular level, at a biological level, chemically within the body as well. So I've just always been fascinated by people, I think. But the thing now, a kind of quest that I'm on now, I have more whys. I don't know everything. I really don't. I know some things, but there's so much that I don't know why. And I think there's so much that we can understand with logical thinking and reasoning, but there's so much more that we can't understand through that. And I guess that's kind of part of my own personal journey too. Um, Trying to understand things that go beyond words, like we mentioned about music, mentioned about um, meditation. They can bring us to places that explain things that are bigger than us. And I think that that is that's where my digging is going, leading me more in a direction like currently. I say I'm thinking of doing psychiatry. Like I feel like it's the best fit for me in terms of medicine, but I'm also really interested in other modalities of healing. Um, I've considered doing different courses and trainings. Like I'm a trained cacao facilitator, um, with ceremonial cacao, and I would love to do more work along like holistic modalities, energy work, um, sound healing. There's a whole range of things that are not captured by Western thinking. That includes psychology and psychiatry. Um, so it's a continuous path.
Yeah, I love that answer. If you do choose psychiatry, you will be such an amazing help for people who are looking for the holistic path and looking for the conventional side.
Well, thank you for saying that. That means a lot. And I think that it's about bridging the world because there's a lot of anti-psychiatry sentiment, a lot of anti-medical sentiment, um, particularly in places where there's a lot of focus on holistic therapy and other alternative healing methods.
Like Reddit.
Like Reddit, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't blame them for all the reasons that I've outlined. However, we need things that are grounded in evidence as well, because there can be a certain amount of abuse of power. Like abuse of power doesn't just come into play when there are things within quote unquote the system.
Mm-hmm.
It happens in places outside of that system too.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to be so careful of that. And like abuse of power in alternative healing communities is huge. Like we've seen that throughout COVID. We have seen that in other, like I'm thinking of like the whole host of like Netflix documentaries there are, and other documentaries about like particular figureheads of
Cults.
groups and cults, and but also on an individual basis as well, like being within the system where you're like held accountable because there's like a regulated body. It protects people as well. So it's about bridging those worlds. I think we're really in need of more of the, we need to embrace more of the things that go beyond words, go beyond the rational mind in Western psychology and Western medicine. Um, but I think that accountability is really important, and safety. And that's another one of the core tenets of Psycare, is that there are a number of groups, for example, in Ireland and other places, that are helping people reach these ecstatic states through different modalities, and are not doing it in a safe way. They're, people are being blown open to all different kinds of states of consciousness and experiences without a proper container, without a proper support system. And Psycare is there for those people too. We're a group, multidisciplinary team of, we have myself, my brother is a psychotherapist, we have a trainee psychiatrist, a homeopath, a transpersonal therapist. We have an ICU nurse on our team, a trainee solicitor. We have other trainee therapists in various modalities, psychonauts, session heads. It's a wonderful team, but we all care. We've all been in difficult, choppy waters, shall we say, in our own ways. And yeah, we're hoping to bridge that gap, making, as I said, even offering a heart-centered service for people in the music festival. But I believe that Psycare is going to go much further than that. It's going to, yeah, it's growing legs. And even with the recent the HSE drug testing that we've seen this year, with the recent announcement that the Oireachtas has recommended the decriminalisation of substances in Ireland, like things are changing. Things are changing at a very quick rate in this country, which is beautiful, beautiful to see.
Where would you like Psychare to go to in the forthcoming years?
Um, the most important thing for me is sustainability. So I would love to really do what we do at festivals and do it well. I would love to see us go to bigger festivals next year, for example, in a way that like our volunteers feel supported. But beyond that, I could see us going further. It's kind of all a bit unclear at the moment, but unclear in the most exciting of ways. Like this time last year, we were just a bunch of people who met on Zoom because it was still in the middle of COVID. Like we had hardly had like an in-person meeting. And now this year we've trained nearly 40 volunteers. Next year we hope to train 80 to 100 volunteers. So with that exponential growth, there are, you know, who knows where it's going to go. Maybe someday it will, like I think that overall we'd like to see someday us being part of a change in the model of care provided for people who use substances for people with mental health difficulties, and that could have many different guises. It's hard to say at this moment in time, but it feels full of potential.
Wow, I can't wait to see what trajectory it will go on in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, amazing. So, being involved in festivals, there's a lot of drug use.
Yeah.
What potential do you think that recreational drugs currently have in the future for maybe decriminalization or else within the therapeutic sense, such as psychedelics mixed with psychotherapy? What do you think the future holds for these drugs?
It's a really big question. I think that there are so many things that we're learning about drugs that are used recreationally. Um, we could start with, let's say, psilocybin.
Yeah,
Psilocybin has a whole host of potential uses. In the future, I foresee it being used in palliative care for people who are about to cross that threshold into the unknown. And this is what I mean by like the Western medical model. We have palliative care. We have no idea what happens afterwards.
yeah. Just to be clear, palliative care is like whenever you're about to die,
Yes,
right?
yes, it is. It is. Well, not just when you're about to die, actually, palliative care starts with whenever you're diagnosed with an illness that may affect your longevity.
Right.
It's a wonderful specialty, and it's something that I have considered in the past studying more into, but
Tim Ferriss got a great podcast with someone who works in palliative care.
very good. Um, it's a great podcast. But also just kind of like psychedelics, they can help us to find meaning in the realm of things that we cannot study with our own two eyes. Um, which is again where like things that are grounded in science, like say psychology, medicine, it's all like science is the study of what we can observe and then what we can replicate. And then you can replicate it, and then another person can replicate it again and again and again. And then that those studies are gathered and independently evaluated. But what about the things that we can't observe with our own two eyes? Like internal emotional processes, like the impact of trauma, uh, on a felt sense. Like we can't study actual bodily sensations like body work, energy work. Um, Psychedelics can. I've seen people have huge shifts in their mental health symptoms, um, and that might tip them in and out of like a diagnosis, like meeting the criteria that's used by Western psychiatry to meet criteria for a diagnosis or not. But the inner workings of that, like what's actually going on internally in the mind and the body, in the whole of that person, like psychedelics taps into that in a really holistic way, um, and can also help people find faith in something that's greater than us as well, which I think many people are severely lacking in this day and age, especially going back to what we were talking about, abuse of power. So many people who previously were religious or who had spirituality through religion um, have abandoned all sense of meaning. And instead, I hate to say it, like I'm on social media too. It's a great platform. It can be used for as a wonderful platform, but people getting sucked into ego being the version of ourselves that we want the world to see, that we're constantly monitoring, the image that we put forward of ourselves to ourselves. Um, mic slap. We put forward to our to our own selves that we want to believe is true. Version we present to others. And social media is just like that on a silver platter in the public domain or the semi-public domain. Um, Being trapped in that world is inherently going to affect your mental health in some way because it's all about like how am I seen by the other, if that makes sense. Whereas, there's so much that we can do like when we're in that space, like if we're kind of living our life, like how is this being perceived all the time? It was a little bit like what you were talking about in terms of like climbing the hill. You wanted to climb, what was the name of the hill?
Cave Hill.
Cave Hill. Climbing Cave Hill and posting about it on social media, and everyone gives you loads of likes and little hearts and claps and stuff. But you know, like the internal hill that you're climbing, or the work that you're doing, not only with your struggles but bettering yourself. Um, and there can even that it is a tricky one as well, because now, while social media is used as a platform as well for like healing, and there's a beautiful community of people sharing their own journeys on these platforms, but still it's a curated version of ourselves still. So we have to be very careful with that. Um, yeah,
Yeah, there's also the struggle of if you create this identity on social media, you then put the pressure on yourself to live up to your social media identity. And then you are creating this false self, and you're thinking you're not being yourself, but really you're trying to be someone who you're not.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I've experienced that too.
yeah.
Hmm.
So some other companies in the industry now that are working with the integration of psychedelics mixed with psychotherapy are
Hmm.
companies such as like MAPS.
Yes.
I read that your ethos for Psycare is based on MAPS, or
We would take a lot of inspiration from MAPS and other organizations that work in this field. We take a lot of inspiration from Cosmicare as well, um, who are kind of the original founders of this psychiatry work. Um, yeah.
so recently I had a listener from the YouTube channel and podcast send me a message.
Hmm.
He wanted to have a phone call with me,
Okay.
and basically at the end of our phone call, he told me that he wanted to go off his antipsychotic medication to leave his house, go into the woods, and take psychedelic mushrooms
Okay.
to try and help him recover from his psychosis.
Hmm.
And I told him to not take the psychedelic mushrooms.
Okay.
And if he is going to go off the antipsychotic medication, to take it in a safe environment and do it as slowly as possible. And I, although I did not take antipsychotic medication, I don't want to encourage people to not take medication, but if they want to not take the medication, I want to make sure that they're in the best environment possible for them to wean off the medication,
Mm.
because it can bring in a state of psychosis.
Hmm.
And I don't want to encourage anyone to take psychedelics,
Hmm.
especially not in a therapeutic sense, which is why companies like MAPS, I feel like, are so important, or Inward Bound, which I would like to get into. However, whenever it comes with psychosis, it's such a difficult thing to talk about because there's not a lot of research done with psychedelics and psychosis. In the like late 60s, they, as far as I'm aware, they did do a lot of research into psychedelics because they believed that the psychedelic state was most similar to a state of psychosis.
Mm. Hmm.
And they believed that maybe they would be able to help people with psychosis by studying the psychedelic state.
Hmm.
Do you think there is potential for, in the future, people being able to experiment with psychosis recovery through psychedelics?
It's a very good question. Um, and it's one that doesn't have an easy answer. Um, I know that the majority of places that do allow for like psychedelic assisted therapy, do not advise people with a history of psychosis or even a family history of psychosis to take psychedelics.
Yeah, they're completely not allowed to participate if their family
Mm.
member has got psychosis.
Yeah,
It's all anxiety, depression, PTSD.
yeah. And I think that there just is not enough research at this moment in time to say that it would be safe. And I think that at present, it's probably better to err on the side of caution. I would like to see more studies into it, like, for example, um, where people who have experienced psychosis can, in a safe, supported environment, be supported to taper off their medication and then experiment maybe even with microdosing. But we do know, for example, that some people who take psychedelics can enter a state of persistent hallucination. It's called HPPD. Um, so what is it? Oh my God, my brain. HPPD. It's like persistent perceptual disturbance disorder, basically. And they are unable to stop tripping. And for some people, that's just like they're still seeing swirling patterns, or they're still, for I've met a few people who have HPPD, um, and many of them aren't that distressed by it, but understandably, it can affect your ability, like, to drive a car, because it's like I need to see what's coming towards me, or if it can impact their ability to work. Um, so I suppose there is that big question mark over, like, if you can continue to experience things that you can't nor that you don't normally experience in your regular state of consciousness from psychedelics, there's a lot of reason to believe that it could exacerbate somebody who has psychosis experiencing further psychosis. Um, but I hope that there will be studies on this in the future. And I think that a huge part of it as well is that we need to look at, as we've spoken about, the impact of stigma, the impact on how we respond to psychotic symptoms, um, whether we welcome them as, like, okay, well, maybe, for example, if someone's hearing a voice, what is this voice trying to tell you? Is it trying to protect a part of you? And let's tap into that part, that vulnerable part. It could be your inner child, it could be whatever, it could be any part, a wounded part of that person. Um, I know sometimes that voices can be saying things that are very distressing. Um, they can be giving someone a message to injure themselves, end their own life, hurt other people, and that is much more difficult to understand from that kind of lens that I just described of trying to understand what it's saying. But I believe that there could well be some kind of underlying mechanism that we haven't tapped into yet of why people experience psychosis, and how to help people live with psychosis without necessarily suppressing it.
Yeah, I resonate with that. My belief is if you have psychosis, you don't necessarily need to take psychedelics either because the symptoms can be so similar
Okay.
that, like, what people are looking for with psychedelics,
Mm-hmm.
you almost have with psychosis. And so if you go deeper into your psychosis and, like, bottle it with
Mm-hmm.
love,
Yeah.
then you will be able to learn more about yourself than the average person will through a trip.
Wow.
And I do see my psychosis as kind of like being on psychedelics,
Okay.
like the prolonged state. It for the for someone who's not experienced psychosis is what I compare it to.
That's so interesting. Wow. I think that, yeah, there has to be something in that, but we need to listen to more people who have experienced psychosis and hear more stories to get to the core of that. Um, yeah, and I hope that these kinds of conversations will continue and pave the way for that. Yeah,
Yeah, I hope so too.
yeah.
I asked you earlier about Stan Groff off the podcast.
Yes,
Have you ever experimented with holotropic breathwork?
I have not.
You've
I'm
not?
very curious about it, and um, holotropic breath work and like Stan Groff's work, I guess, for maybe people who aren't familiar with it. Um, yeah, he writes a lot about the realms of our unconscious, which is like the part of our minds that we're not always aware of in our like conscious and our conscious level, but also about the transpersonal element. So things that happen maybe in previous lifetimes or those kinds of things. And they say that through holotropic breathwork, you can access those alternative dimensions, life stories. And it was funny, I read one of his books called Realms of the Unconscious, and it occurred to me that maybe sometimes some people in psychosis are actually experiencing that they're like channeling something from another, possibly from another lifetime or from another, they're in tune with some kind of other stream of consciousness that is flowing through them in maybe a fractured way that is coming through. And I think that those kinds of concepts are things that are not, um, there needs to be more work done, more work and more studying done on those, because I feel like it could help answer some of the unanswered questions, that the many unanswered questions that we have about mental health. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think onto something there. A lot of my delusions
Okay.
were around paramilitaries
Interesting.
and around MI5 secret services.
Okay.
And coming from a traumatized area, Belfast,
Mm.
where there had been a war, where MI5 have had a huge part to play, where there has been microphones put into houses,
Yes.
where there has been spies put into Belfast, infiltrating communities. Uh, there, Belfast is a highly traumatized state because of these events,
Mm-hmm.
and this has played a huge part within my delusions and paranoia during my psychosis.
Mm-hmm.
And paramilitary is having such a huge influence in Belfast today, with the UDA pretty much controlling a huge percentage of the drugs
Okay.
in Belfast. It's everyone is aware that they launder money through pubs and they sell huge amount of drugs and they all get away with it. It's basically like a mafia at this point.
Okay.
And yeah, I my family has not been as affected from the war as other families.
Mm-hmm.
However, I'm still a part of the culture and still part of the society.
Yeah.
And so, and also like with past life regressions,
Mm-hmm.
like my history is Irish, and as an Irish person, like we have faced so much oppression
Mm-hmm.
and genocide with famine and wars
Mm.
that like we both come from a traumatized society there,
We do.
and it is ingrained within our culture,
Mm-hmm.
even within the amount of alcohol that our culture drinks.
Mm-hmm.
Like every weekend, it's not have a few beers, it's get fucking plastered.
Get obliterated to the point where we can't remember.
Yeah,
That's, yeah, I'm really glad that you've touched on that, because I think that um, Psycare in Ireland is different to Psycare in other places, Psycaring in other places. Because in our country, we, as you said, like we have such a tumultuous relationship with alcohol, and we're just flooded with, you know, this normality that it's okay to completely destroy ourselves. And it's, again, I feel like harm reduction conversations have to include alcohol,
yeah,
because it is the most commonly used substance in our country.
Yeah.
Um,
It's also one of the most dangerous drugs.
it is like David Nutt, for example, did drug science. Has this really There's this very cool slide based on some of his studies looking at like drug harms in society and to the individual person, and there's one particular one that shows the substances that cause the most harm, and alcohol is up there as like in the top two with heroin as the substance that causes the most harm to the individual, society, and the people around.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Weed is quite high up as well, right? And psychedelics are the lowest.
way down here,
Yeah.
which is fascinating. But this ties into the conversation about prohibition and like if we're thinking rationally and logically, why is it that, all of these other substances are banned when they have numerous therapeutic applications? Like I know I didn't really fully answer your question. You asked me about about drugs in general. We've talked about psilocybin and its use in palliative care. It can also be used in pain. It can be used in like so many other realms that we just haven't explored yet. Trauma, healing, depression, anxiety, a whole swathe of potential solutions through psychedelics. But then also like MDMA for PTSD
Which
can,
MAPS are doing a lot of work with, right?
yes, exactly. There's also plenty of other applications for MDMA. Like originally, it was a research chemical that sprung loose from the lab and then found its way into the party scene, um, which is fascinating to think about. But then you also have like cannabis and its use for its potential use for the solution to so many things, like cannabis and hemp in terms of like as a biofuel, for clothing, for paper, for um, cannabis products for pain, for
Yeah.
as a natural remedy for many other things.
Yeah. Cerebral palsy or those that are
Seizure
paralyzed,
disorders, yeah,
seizures.
huge. Endometriosis as well.
What's that?
Endometriosis is a condition where the tissue that is normally found in the womb, that tissue that's normally found in the womb that's hormone sensitive, that kind of swells and then like shrinks under the influence of hormones, um, is found in other parts of the body outside of the womb. So it can lead to like really, really debilitating pain. Um, and it takes on average 10 years for a person to reach a diagnosis with endometriosis. But recently there has been cannabis licenses issued to people with endometriosis in Ireland, and it's revolutionary because other products, like for people who don't want to take like traditional painkillers, like it's a whole host of other applications. Though I think it is important when we're talking about cannabis, though, and this is something that I admit that I need to do more reading into, but about the relationship with psychosis.
Yeah.
And I think from watching some of your own videos, would I be right in thinking that cannabis had some kind of a role in the story?
Yeah, it's a huge part to play. Like, I
Yeah.
would be diagnosed with a cannabis-induced psychosis because I ate brownie, an edible,
Yeah.
before my voices first came in.
Okay.
And I then did smoke joints after that, and it exacerbated the symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
So, cannabis had a huge part to play. However, I see a lot of people on Reddit be like, oh, you just shouldn't smoke weed then. If you stop smoking weed, like your symptoms will go away. It's just not as simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, cannabis sort of unlocked the door,
Okay.
and there was still all this stuff behind the door that needed to be sorted with.
Yeah. And I think that um like in terms of cannabis, there are many different strains of cannabis as well. Like mentioning like the different components in cannabis, like there's THC, which is supposedly the psychoactive component, but then there's also CBD. Like you can buy CBD weed from vending machines, even in Croatia, where they're really anti-drug. You can buy that because it has like a generally calming effect.
You can buy it here too.
Can you? Oh,
Yeah.
that's right. You were saying that someone who has a shop and that here, yeah. But then there's also like CBG and I think CBN as well. Like there's so many different components, and I think we need to look at like if cannabis is tied to psychosis, if so, what strains, and like um, what is out there on the market. And this is the other problem with prohibition, is that we have no idea what is being sold.
Yeah.
No idea. And the HSE drug testing that happened in at Electric Picnic this year showed that there were multiple substances in circulation that were missold. Like there were cathinones, which are really dangerous substances that produce an effect like MDMA, but last longer and are associated with many more like distressing symptoms, like longer experiences that last longer and much worse come downs. Um, and they were found at Electric Picnic. So it's very, very scary, but knowledge is the only way to like studying these things, like testing and getting rid of this prohibition model that we have of just like, oh, don't ask, don't tell, just like, oh yeah, well, if people want to use drugs, that's their own fault, and just having no services for them. We can't go on like this. Ireland has one of the highest rates of deaths from drugs in Europe, and that's a recent statistic
And suicide.
in relation to drug use, or just generally.
It generally.
Yeah,
However, the two can be linked quite
of
easily, right?
course. And alcohol as well. We know that alcohol is, involved in many violent crimes. It's involved in many attempts on people taking attempts on their own life. I've seen that and working in the hospital. Like I know that when someone comes in and they've attempted suicide, that a lot of the time they will drink beforehand. And I know plenty of people, I've seen it in people I've worked with and in friends too, that their mental health is often, they drink to avoid their problems or to get away from them, but it makes them so much worse. And they feel so much worse when they drink and after they drink. It's a neurotoxin that it stays in our system for about 10 days, they reckon.
Yeah, 10 days is crazy.
Yeah. And we just ingest it on such a frequent basis. And I think that there is a time and a place for all substance use. Like we've talked about the good applications of drugs. Alcohol also helps people bond in social situations. They call it like a social lubricant,
Dutch
like
courage.
Dutch courage, but also, I don't know, talking about like different medicines in different cultures. Like I think a pint of Guinness with, or a couple of drinks down the pub with like your dad, or with a friend, it can be therapeutic. It can be medicinal. It can help you to share more stories and be more open. But it's just about how we're using it and the quantity, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, on that note about prohibition, especially with cannabis,
Mm-hmm.
Blind Boy,
Yeah.
the podcast guy, he's more than a podcast guy.
Musician,
Yeah.
writer.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's
He put
pretty
it,
class.
he is, yeah. He put it perfectly with the example of prohibition with cannabis.
Hmm.
The only strain that you can get in Ireland is do you want it or not?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that is so true. And who knows? Who knows what's in it? And
Yeah.
I've heard so many stories of people saying, like, they had like 2 bags of weed, for example, and depending on which bag they smoked, one made them feel like one way, like really creative and in their body and like in real flow state, and helped them with anxiety. And they felt great the next day, they felt more in tune. And then smoke or ingest something from the other bag and they're paranoid, on like climbing the walls, like almost hearing things. Like
Yeah.
it's scary.
I've experienced that myself. Having had the privilege to smoke a lot of weed in different countries,
Okay.
I've been able to smoke organic weed
Oh.
and weed that was legal in the Netherlands, say.
Mm.
And like the best weed that I ever had was organically grown in Australia, and I can't remember the strain of it, so I'm not going to promote it or anything like that. But the experience I had when smoking that grass was so relaxing, so calming. It was blissful. It was amazing.
Mm.
And then I come back to Belfast I smoke a joint, and like the first joint's like all bubbly and buzzy, you know what I mean? And then it's paranoia.
Mm,
And this is a hypothesis. I believe that the chemicals that are used to sprayed onto the cannabis to make it grow quicker indoors
hmm.
has a huge part to play in the the health of the plant and the effect that it has on you. And then on top of that too, a lot of people will spray the cannabis so that it will smell nicer in the bag
Okay.
or more stronger.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's making your brain unhealthier.
Yeah, true. I think also an important thing to consider, like when taking any substance, and including alcohol, it's about set and it's about setting.
Yeah.
So the mindset that you're in when you're on holidays, for example, versus when you're at home doing something that you know is illegal.
Yeah.
Setting. Also
Yeah.
who you're with. And that's something at Psycare that we talk a lot about. Like when we talk to people, if they're looking for advice about substances, like firstly, the first thing we say is like the only safe way to take drugs is to not take drugs.
It's true.
It's true. However, there's always the like, we get that, we say that because it's true, but then we say, but if you are going to do it, and this is where Ireland is changing, is that we're now following this up with like, just don't do it with, but if you are going to take it, because people do, and we're
And
not going to stop them.
people will always take them as well.
Yeah, they will. Um,
No matter how many signs you have on the wall that say, don't do drugs,
yeah,
people will take them.
they will. They will. People want to explore their own consciousness. People want to push their boundaries. People want to do things that they're told not to do. It's part of the human nature, I think. So I suppose it's all just about how to make that as safe as possible for people and how to help people make informed decisions around like what are they taking, what are the likely effects going to be. Another key part again that we talk about at Psycare is drug combinations. What happens when you take this with this? There's a wonderful resource called the Tripsit chart. You can find it online, and it's like a chart, and it goes through most of the like common drugs, including like prescription medications as well, like how they interact with other psychoactive substances. And to nobody's surprise, absolutely nobody, or it shouldn't be to anyone's surprise, alcohol goes really badly with nearly every single substance, particularly other things that are have like a depressant or like a downturning effect on our body and our nervous system. So things like benzodiazepines, ketamine, GHB. GHB can be lethal when mixed with alcohol. Um, and GHB is also one of those drugs that has a very narrow therapeutic index, or not therapeutic, yeah, therapeutic index is like the window of which where something is like has a desired effect and then where it becomes really dangerous and possibly lethal. So the dosing with GHB is really important. But because it acts on GABA, which is a neurochemical in our brain, and alcohol acts on GABA as well, and they both have incredibly sedating and they're both downers, I suppose, on our system, can lead to very dangerous situations happening. And I suppose another common combination that we see a lot is ketamine with alcohol. Ketamine is an anesthetic. It's also used to induce states of unconsciousness in people undergoing surgery, like an anesthesia. Um, and yeah, seen so much of that across Ireland during the summer. But it's funny how people will react to the knowledge that you give them. Like it's been shown internationally in research, like for example at Boom they had a drug testing service, and they've done studies on this, that the vast majority of people will change their drug use pattern if they're told that, like, say, that pill you handed in, it's not what it said it was, or it's not what it as sold. The majority of people will either take less or throw it out. So that's knowledge. People will change their habits based on information you give them about drug combinations. Like so many people being like, oh, maybe I won't take ket and coke together. I mean, ket and alcohol together. Ket and Coke is another very popular combination.
Yeah, Calvin Klein.
Calvin Klein, yeah, yeah. But
Know it
it's
too well. It was a big favorite of mine. Like,
but like it's just about information, and it's just about like actually opening up this conversation, because like when I was an upcoming teenager and like there were drugs around, like there was nobody to tell you anything about what to do. Like even like harm reduction, I think starts it has to start so early. Do you know, like I was very blessed when it came to alcohol. Like my parents would be like, here's 3 bottles of Miller, off you go to your party, have a lovely time, and if you've any problems, give me a ring. And that was the start of harm reduction. So I think, I know there's, you were saying, you asked me earlier, like, where does this come from with, your family? What's up with your family? It comes from that kind of approach, I think. But it's where we need to start. We need to get the basics
uh,
right. Yeah.
it's brilliant your family give you the safe space to drink alcohol, even if the beer's questionable.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Ah.
Yeah, to compare to me, like I started drinking whenever I was 13,
Okay.
and how I got introduced to alcohol
Hmm.
was we actually like looked in the forest to try and find alcohol, and if there was like a bottle of like WKD, would drink it, and then it led to us asking other people to buy alcohol for us, and like we would get like a bottle. Do you know Frosty Jacks?
No,
No, oh, is it an up north thing? Is it?
I think so.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
Okay.
3 liter bottle of cider, 7.5% alcohol.
Oh,
And you'd share that with a friend and do
yeah.
dizzy dinosaurs while drinking it.
Oh
And
my
you'd
God.
end up like thrown up in a graveyard
Wow.
and have to be carried home. Talking from lived experience. And it wasn't until I was 16 that I started going to house parties. My mum was like, you know what, Leo, like I'll buy you a 4% alcohol bottle of cider.
Mm.
And like whenever she bought me that, I didn't throw up.
Mm-hmm.
I was fine.
Yeah,
And so like yeah, like being given that safe space is really important.
definitely.
And the trust.
Yeah. 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 That is it. And like, people say if you treat people like kids, they'll carry on like kids.
Yeah,
And I think that thankfully there seems to be waves of change in the thinking in the powers that be at the moment, in that like we have to trust people to use substances safely, because when you lead with mistrust, like you're going to have more negative outcomes.
completely. Yeah. So a company from Ireland
Mm-hmm.
who are working with the use of psychedelics is your friends at Inward Bound.
Yeah,
Yeah. And you recently went over there and had a retreat with them.
I did. I did. Yeah.
Would you like to share that experience with us?
Sure, I can tell you bits about it. So Inward Bound are an Irish organization, and they run retreats legally in the Netherlands, where you can purchase truffles for personal use. So it was actually this week. I went over there and I had a beautifully held experience with some wonderful facilitators and with a wonderful group of other people who are interested in exploring their own consciousness. And I'm really pleased that I was able to experience this. It feels like I can actually, it's really nice to be able to talk about this experience, because I know that it was done in a legal way. Um, I found myself in a very deep emotional state. I was challenged, definitely challenged at times. But I found a lot of personal meaning through it, and a lot of personal growth and healing I'm hoping will come from it too. Um, I'm still in the kind of integration phase, I suppose, after like the peak experience. There's a Zen Buddhist quote that I'm trying to kind of remind myself of, and it's before enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. after enlightenment, chop wood and carry water.
Ah, yeah, I love that.
So it means, yeah, it basically means that, your life is not going to change. You have to still do the things that you have to do, but, and you have to kind of work enlightenment into your everyday. You can't just like have a peak experience and expect your whole life to change. Like it's continuous work. It's continuous work, but through gentle methods of integration, like working with cacao, um, journaling, drawing, um, and yeah, doing whatever it is that helps you to connect back to that place when you felt enlightened while continuing on with chopping wood and carrying water. um, yeah, so it was just a beautiful, beautiful experience and one that I'm so thankful for. Um, yeah, I feel like it's something that will stay with me for a very long time.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Could you share with us the practices that you did during the retreat and how you felt during it?
Okay. I can't go into too much detail,
Okay.
but I can say that there were many beautiful practices from a variety of traditions, like from South American traditions. There were a lot of elements related to like Celtic spirituality, which is kind of part of what Inward Bound do, which I think is amazing because, as we know, before Ireland was um, colonized, before Catholicism or Christianity came to Ireland, we had a beautiful connection to the land
Yeah.
and to nature.
Yeah.
And living in harmony with nature was a huge part of life. Um, and over the years, we've lost touch with that. So many practices that helped us to reconnect with that. Like we spent a lot of time outdoors, for example, and that was actively encouraged. Various yoga practices to come back into the breath, come back to the body. Um, yeah, it was really special, and um, yeah,
What was there in the Celtic influence?
in the Celtic influence, um, well, I suppose living cyclically, like there's a lot of respect for the time of year. Like this is winter time, it's time to slow down, for example. That's just one example. Um, yeah, and turning to um, yeah, turning to things that are, as I said before, like things that are a bit bigger than us, bit bigger than us. Music was a big part of it as well, which is, again, a huge part of set and setting. And there was some really wonderful music at the retreat as well, which was fantastic. Um,
Did you get the borons out and all?
there were no barons. But yeah, lots of singing, and I feel very inspired. I feel incredibly inspired. I think Irish music is like, I feel really at home within myself when I sing Irish songs, especially ones in Oscuelga. Um, but yeah, just finding the time and the space to like hold that with it within ourselves, instead of like this kind of patriarchal world that we live in that's always go 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 go. You're not you're not living unless you're doing or being productive or whatever, but just expression for the sake of expression, being an act in itself, resting because you need rest. Like reverence to these kinds of ideas is a huge part of the experience that I had. And yeah, I'll, yeah, cherish it.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing that, Kat.
No worries.
You are also a cacao facilitator.
Yes,
Yeah. Uh, Tell us a bit about that. Like, start off with why did you become a cacao facilitator in the first place?
sure.
Back to why.
Back to the whys. I kind of came across it accidentally, actually. I had just started medical school in Dublin, and my brother said to me, "Oh, there's this ceremony on. Do you want to come?" I was like, "Yeah, all right, grand." Um, wasn't expecting much, but actually, it was a ceremony held by a lady called Paula Gibson. And we were served the cacao, and we were talking about how it's a heart medicine, and I had no concept of like, what is a heart medicine? Is it like gonna increase my heart rate? I kind of thought, I was thinking in the very scientific, physical realm, that kind of linear way of thinking. But what happened during that ceremony was actually that I felt like an opening within my spirit, within my soul, within my body, whatever, however you want to phrase it. I felt the most in touch with myself that I had felt for a long, long time, because this was kind of back at a time when I suppose my mental health difficulties were much more recent in my mind. And I had come through, like I really I was in a very good place at this time, but just realizing that I was really cut off from a large part of myself. And yeah, I guess realizing that I was living kind of in the head space versus the heart space, making decisions with my head, not my heart. I think everybody can relate to that, you know, like sayings like, oh, my heart's in my mouth or whatever. Like we know intuitively that our mind and body are connected. Like, like anyone who's had like um, had to perform or had an exam or something like that, your stomach starts doing flips, or when you're in love, like the way your heart feels, all of these things. But we just kind of like, yeah, but there's the mind and then there's the body, but that it's not true. It's not true.
Yeah, they're connected.
They're absolutely connected. And I think that's one of the things about being a medical doctor as well, that like I find difficult sometimes, is that there's so much focus on the body, but not enough integration. In terms of like the meaning behind what's happening in our body as well, in relation to the whole, if that makes sense. So we study the biological processes, but we don't put them into context, like, oh, you go to the heart doctor for this and you go to this doctor for that, but who's looking after the big picture, um, and the metaphorical meaning, especially of the heart. But once I had had that experience, I actually found myself relating to other people in a very different way, and relating to myself with way more compassion than I ever had before. I think in past times I used to kind of motivate myself by being hard on myself, which was grand when I was doing well. But if something went wrong, you can't always get what you want, right? That's life. Um, spirals of thoughts would appear, like stories of like, oh, I should have done this, or I could have done that better, would come into play. Or for example, when I would react to something in a particular way, again, the mind taking over, um, judging my reactions to things, judging my actions, judging my thoughts, judging my feelings. Coming more into the heart space made me realize that, like, actually, when you melt those kind of, you're adding layers onto your own experience with like negativity and self-judgment, and when you're lacking self-compassion. But when you melt those away and just like it helps, and when you observe, so it kind of meditation and like all the things I mentioned before about just seeing something and allowing it to be there, it changed my life. It actually really did. um it didn't help by this stage I was like up to here in medical school, and it was like, okay, well, you're in this now. And like, in ways, I think it's kind of funny that I've ended up as a medical doctor now. Like it always kind of made sense, but there's such an interesting timing in how all these things happen, that I happen to have a huge kind of personal journey of the deeper and more broad whys, while I was like studying in a system that is quite discompassionate at times. Um, so yeah, so that's kind of the why. I just want to share it, and I actually really hope to share that more soon. I think when I'm in my doctor role, because that still affects me, even though I try to carry the compassion. Going in and talking, like, to, like, say, um, within the medical realm, talking about these kinds of concepts, it can be difficult. It can be like, I can be self-monitoring and, like, judging, like, oh God, people think I'm talking absolute nonsense, or, like, worried about being challenged or being questioned and that. But I'm finding more confidence in myself and my ability to bridge the two worlds. Like, I see myself very firmly having definitely one foot in the system, but one foot is kind of like dancing through other realms. Um, and while I don't know where it's going to take me exactly, I feel that I'm in a very lucky position.
Yeah, I love that metaphor. I can visualize just like your foot go. Yeah, I don't know who said it, but there's a quote: "Events in our life happen for us, not to us." And like all these events at play are just like you following your path into where you are today.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If any of the listeners are wanting to learn more about Cacao
Hmm.
or wanting to maybe participate in a Cacao ceremony,
Hmm.
how would they go about doing that?
Sure. I hope to offer some cacao ceremonies from next year, actually. It's one of my things I'm trying to push myself more into. I have held kind of ceremonies informally, and I held my first formal ceremony this year.
Cool.
So you can reach out to me for more information, or um, online. There's a great community of people online offering ceremonies all over Ireland. Yeah. There's lots of different varieties of cacao. Different brands like that you can try and find, but I would recommend that if people want to use it for kind of more deep work, that they make sure that they're using ceremonial grade cacao, which is kind of, it usually states it on the label. It's kind of, it's processed in a different way. It's minimally processed. Um, and also keep your eyes peeled. There are many events where people use ceremonial cacao in slightly lower doses for practices like ecstatic dance. Um, and yeah, it's really becoming more popular here in Ireland. And I have to say, particularly, even thinking of Irish people getting up and dancing in, like, technically a sober state of mind, like without alcohol, it's a wonderful thing to see. Like, so someone actually pointed that out to me the other day. They were like, did you ever think you'd see that day? I'm like, yeah, it's a big step forward. And I think a lot of it comes back to the trauma that we faced in this country, and the systematic repression of our emotions through the church, through shame, stigma, trauma. And I hope that collectively that we're on a path to healing in this country. I feel really positive for the future.
Fuck yeah, preach it. That's what I missed with dancing.
Mm,
What I experienced through ecstatic dance is almost what I was chasing while I was clubbing. Like,
yeah.
I would take ketamine
Okay.
and it would just like completely relax my body. And
Mm,
I was able to dance and express myself in ways that I didn't think I was able to in society.
mm-hmm.
And during ecstatic dance, I was equally able to do that without the use of drugs.
It's powerful.
It's proper powerful, yeah.
Yeah. And even though we've talked a lot about psychedelics in this conversation, those states of relaxation, of inhibition in a positive way, of feeling free and feeling really connected to ourselves, are actually available to us at all times. Substances can be a portal, but I think that's where the true work lies, is actually learning to tap into these states without the use of exogenous substances.
Completely, yeah. Some of the ways I experience it is through music, through running,
Hmm.
through dancing, and through cold showers as well.
Cold showers like Wim Hof, yeah.
Yeah, I had a cold shower at my cousin's house the other day, and the water was just like far too cold.
Yeah.
It struck me in the face, and
Oh,
like it felt like I was in a different form of consciousness, honestly.
yeah.
Like probably to a level that would have been like too unsafe if I continued that.
Right.
Maybe it would have led to me like passing out, but just maybe the shock had a part to play as well.
Yeah,
But wow, yeah, you can get such a high from cold water.
definitely. And I think that that is so tied to like why so many people felt drawn to sea swimming, especially during COVID, like connection to nature, but also the cold water. Um, yeah.
Yeah, it is not to be messed with though, because
Oh, of
I
course.
have heard of people going, uh, like if you sea swim in Ireland, it's like always cold water.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, sea swimming in Ireland, and then it led to them having a heart attack.
Wow.
Yeah, so you have to be very careful about doing it on your own.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And like water safety in general, like it's, yeah, we can't control the oceans.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, can't fight nature.
Mm-hmm. Which again, I think is why connecting to nature is so important because it reminds us that there are forces greater than us. And it can actually help with a lot of our own personal, our monologues, our stories that we tell ourselves about like who we are, who we're not, who we'd like to be, puts a lot of them into perspective. Mm.
Mm-hmm. Wrapping it up, are there any available resources that people can use if they are going to take drugs? Not that we are encouraging the use of
Mm,
drugs, but
okay,
it's sort of
yeah.
inevitable that people are going to take drugs at festivals. So, for example, one
Yes,
of the resources that I would have used in the past would have been like Pill Report.
yes. Pill Report is an excellent resource. However, Pill Report is also kind of like put like the pill reports are subjective, so it's put in by each individual person and it doesn't capture, it can't be fully representative, but it is an excellent resource.
Yeah, like one Tesla pill might not be the same as another Tesla pill.
Exactly. Yeah. Um, yeah. Trying to think. Psycare Ireland have a website. It's Psycare Ireland, Psycare Ireland, .org. Um,
I'll add that in the description.
Brilliant. Thank you. Um, Tripsit, Tripsit, also have, that's where you can find the chart with all the various drug combinations. Um, the HSE have some information available on their websites as well. Spunout.ie is a very good resource as well, and actually Psycare have started a working relationship with Spunout that we're now cross checking or proofing some of their material to make sure that like just getting multiple eyes on it. And um yeah, so spun out. There are some good UK websites too, like Talk to Frank, for example, is a very helpful and informative website. And yeah, oh, what is it called? um oh my God, I can't think of the name. I'll send you another list if that's okay. There's one particularly for psychedelics that the name I can picture the website, but I just can't remember the name at the moment. But
Okay,
yeah,
perfect. I'll
yeah,
add that in the description.
thank you.
Okay, Kat, I end the podcast with three questions that I give to
Oh,
everyone.
okay.
Okay. So whenever you're ready, it's rapid fire questions, so you can say them like pretty quickly.
Okay.
Yeah. So the first question, name three things that you are grateful for today.
Um, I'm grateful for you, Leo, and this podcast. Um, I'm grateful for, yeah, the winds of change that are coming to Ireland. Um, I'm grateful for community, um, the community of people who are expanding the healing work in Ireland as well.
Beautiful. And I'm grateful for you, Kat.
Thank you.
Question two.
Okay.
Uh, what are two goals that you would like to achieve? Maybe you can do one in the short term, one in the long term.
Oh, um, short term. So many. Um, okay. Yeah. In the pursuit of the many goals, I hope to stay centered and connected to myself. That is like the overarching goal because no matter what I do, that is the most important thing. So I suppose maybe that's the overarching one, but one of those goals perhaps I can share. Um, I really want to buy a van.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I want to buy a van.
And travel?
Travel, Psycare also could do with somebody having a van, so that would be nice. Yeah, I'd love to travel around Europe, Ireland, love to see parts of Scotland. Yeah. So that's kind of a medium term goal. It'll take a while, I'd say, but yeah.
Class. I have a couple of friends that I have a couple of friends, got a couple of friends that have done it with van,
Mm,
and some are traveling, some are still working on their van.
yeah.
So I could connect you as well, and you can have some conversations. One of my friends, one of my group of friends, they are working at putting like a stove inside of their
Oh,
van.
lovely, toasty.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they're going. The stuff they're doing or plan to be doing with their van is amazing. Yeah, so I can
Hmm.
connect you.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, no bother. And the final question, who is one person you would like to let them know that you love them?
Ah, God. That's very sweet. Um, I would say my dad because he has never given up on me.
Oh,
And yeah, yeah, he's been there for me through a lot. And funny story, I very nearly didn't go to medical school. I uh, was freaking out while I was supposed to do the entrance test because I was like finishing my psychology degree. And my dad kicked me out of the car outside the test center on the dual carriageway. He was like, I'm gonna pick you up, and then I was like chickening out, not chickening out, I was just freaking out in the car. And I was like, no, 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 I can't do it. And he kicked me out of the car and left me abandoned on the side of the road. So I had to go do the test and then I got in. So
wow, fair play, Dad.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, sometimes you need that wee nudge, right?
yeah, or boot. Yeah.
Yeah, kicking the arse.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, it's beautiful. Yeah. Uh, love you, Dad. Thank you for sharing that. Uh, are there any final, actually, before I ask you any final words you would like to ask, is there anything that you would like to recommend to people who may be going to a festival and do not have the luxury of having a group such as Psycare there? If they end up in a bad trip,
Yeah.
what is the best thing for them to do?
You mean from like psychedelic drugs in particular?
I suppose it is different for each drug, right?
It can be. Well, for all drugs, I think the most important thing initially is to remember start low, go slow, if you are going to ingest a substance. Um,
That's a great rhyme.
yeah, it's good. Um, yeah, so start with small doses. Remember, you can always take more, you can never take less. Helpful advice. But if you do find yourself like psychologically overwhelmed, remind yourself that you've taken something and that it will take some time to pass through your body, but that you will come out the other side. Sometimes people can forget that, um, yeah, that, you know, some people actually just forget, like, I'm high right now. They're just like, they actually forget that they've ingested something at all. And then I suppose, like, if someone feels physically unwell, to seek help, even if you worry that you're going to get into trouble. Things are changing. Paramedics, medics who work at these events are not interested in prosecuting you or getting you into trouble. Like, if you have any like concerning symptoms, I mean the likes of like say chest pain or shortness of breath, there's a whole list of them. But if you're feeling unwell and you feel something's off, or if you're worried about a friend, don't hesitate to get medical help, because it can mean the difference between someone going home happily from a festival and someone unfortunately not making it home. So it's really an important message.
Fantastic. Thanks for that.
No worries.
And is there any last comments you'd like to say to your audience of leprechauns?
um, yeah, just stay safe. Um, yeah, I think safety. Remember to be kind to yourself. Remember to be kind to others. Um, and take care. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kat.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Liam.
leprechauns.